Good morning, members of the media and viewers and listeners. The purpose of this press conference is to discuss issues relating to the constitutional reform process and where it has now reached, which have been in the media over the past week or so. The matter at hand is one of intergenerational importance to our country. Jamaicans will have to live under the new constitution for generations to come. We have a solemn duty to ensure that the new constitution is appropriately balanced and will protect the rights of our people and the democracy that guarantees our freedoms. Therefore, due care and attention must be given to the proposed changes that will be put into any new constitution. And as the opposition, we have a particular responsibility to be vigilant in this regard. The process of reform must be fully open and transparent. The Constitutional Reform Committee, or CRC, has issued a report, and it must be immediately shared with the public. It cannot be hidden away and only known by its members and by the inner reaches of government. Indeed, the public should have been empowered to review and comment on the reform proposals as detailed in that report, so that the public's views on the specific proposals could be considered by the committee before the report was sent to Cabinet. In my view, the entire reform process has been flawed. It should have been preceded by intense public education on the existing constitution so that the people of Jamaica would have been informed as to what now exists and where the changes ought to come. The reform process should have been genuinely open to a fresh look at the kind of constitution that Jamaicans want to have in the 21st century, rather than limiting ourselves to positions that were agreed some 30 years ago in the 1990s. The terms of reference of the reform should themselves have been open to consultation and consensus, rather than being narrowly dictated by the government. As a result of how it's happened, the decision made by the government to implement positions agreed by the two political parties some 30 years ago, when Jamaicans who are now up to 50 years old had no role in or awareness of those discussions, is an untenable process for seeking engagement and participation in the new constitution by our people. As a result, the reality is that the public consultations which have occurred have really had little significant impact on the contents of the proposals in the CRC report, which has gone to Cabinet yesterday for approval. The wide-ranging desires and concerns of the public for Jamaica's constitution have not found their way into any significant reform proposals in that document. From the outset, back in June or July of 2022, before any Constitutional Reform Committee was appointed, I wrote to the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs to make it clear to the government that for us in the People's National Party, final and full decolonization is a fundamental issue of access to justice for the Jamaican people and of national sovereignty. I have been open and consistent on this position throughout the process since then. Indeed, it is not a Mark Golding position. It is a position of the People's National Party. And we have been consistently trying to move Jamaica in this direction for decades, as you know. Our position is that time come to leave the British monarchy in full, once and for all. When Jamaica is moving out of the King's Yard, we cannot have 1 foot in and 1 foot out of the yard. That would leave us neither fish nor fowl in another man's yard. That can't work. We will not support a phased approach to dealing with the matter of full decolonization, because the phased approach does not guarantee its attainment. It may never happen if we do it that way. The arrangements for access to our people's final court need to get away from visa requirements. We need to get away from rules of court that are in conflict with and whittle down our constitutional rights of appeal. We need to get away from the exorbitant costs of appealing to a final court in London. Ladies and gentlemen, an appeal to the final court can cost taxpayers of Jamaica, in a case involving the government, of over $130 million for one appeal. That is unsustainable and a waste of taxpayers' resources, given where we are in terms of our institutional arrangements regionally. We must move away from having our Constitution interpreted by a colonial-era court comprised of judges in the UK who have no first-hand knowledge of Jamaican culture and conditions. We must move with full confidence in the Caribbean Court of Justice. It is an institution of excellence that has been designed to be both independent of political influence and accessible to our people at an affordable cost. It is a regional institution that Jamaica helped to design and establish. It is fully funded by a trust fund to ensure its protection from external influences. And our people, the Jamaican people, helped to pay for that trust fund. Jamaica is still awaiting Prime Minister Andrew Holness's clear position on the issue of moving away from the Privy Council to the Caribbean Court of Justice as our final court of appeal. From last October, the minister promised that Mr. Holness would soon be making a statement clarifying his position and the government's position on this. 3 weeks ago, I discussed the matter with Mr. Holness behind the Speaker's chair in Parliament, and he said he would be considering the matter, which he understood to be of great importance to us, and that he would let us know where he stands. I didn't hear from him, and I wrote to him a week ago, once again requesting him to make his position known. Jamaica still has not heard from its Prime Minister on this fundamental issue. Ladies and gentlemen, the People's National Party cannot sign off on a report that does not facilitate us moving forward with a bipartisan approach based on consensus around the new Constitution. We as opposition are also concerned about several of the reform proposals that are in the CRC report that has been taken to Cabinet, which we regard as problematic in several respects. And I will mention some of those now. As it stands, the report would enable the government of the day, and this is not about the current government or a future government. This is any government going forward once we have a new constitution. The report would enable the government of the day to use its majority in Parliament to install a president, head of state of the government's choosing, in circumstances where there is no consensus with the opposition as to the appointment of that individual as president. This is unacceptable. The president has important powers making appointments to sensitive positions within the government and the state, and also ceremonial duties as a figure of national unity. It is vital that the president must be someone who enjoys the trust and confidence of both political parties and the wider public. The report would allow the government of the day to use its majority to extend the life of Parliament beyond 5 years. Again, we do not think any government should have that power on its own. The report does nothing to strengthen accountability within Parliament. It expressly rejects the introduction of an impeachment procedure for parliamentarians whose misconduct brings that office into disrepute. Despite an impeachment bill having been developed and tabled in Parliament by the Bruce Golding government, although they never passed it at the time, despite the passage of an impeachment bill being an unfulfilled JLP manifesto commitment from 2016, and despite an updated impeachment bill having been tabled by me as leader of the opposition in Parliament in 2021. Despite these things, the report is saying there should be no impeachment procedure in the new Constitution. The report also does nothing to end majority party control of important parliamentary committees, which should be for providing checks and balances to hold the government to account for its conduct of the nation's business, but as it stands today, are dominated by the government side. As it stands today, most of these committees are controlled and managed by government MPs, with the opposition only having a very small presence and not appointing the chairman. This report does nothing about that. The report also does not deal with long-standing issues of concern to important stakeholders. The desire for engagement and participation by Jamaicans in the diaspora who support our country's national development in critical ways, financially and otherwise. It does nothing to recognize the rights of indigenous groups such as the Maroons and the Rastafari community. These things have not been addressed in the report, despite being matters of real concern to many Jamaicans. Ladies and gentlemen, the rush to take this report to Cabinet without allowing the committee to deliberate on these important issues raised by the opposition in my comments sent last week Friday via Minister Hilton to the minister who co-chairs that committee shows that the government has no genuine desire to achieve consensus on the contents of the new Constitution. As can be expected, the government is now seeking to shift blame to us as the opposition for the government's failure to engage authentically with the opposition to identify a common pathway forward. The public should not be hoodwinked by what is being said in the media today. We have been responsible. We have sought to participate genuinely in the process. We have very real concerns about some of the contents of the report, and we have a fundamental issue which is at the core of our party's philosophy, which needs to be addressed, and we need to hear from the Prime Minister if we're to move forward together. As I have said, this matter will govern generations to come, and we must allow and follow our conscience and do what we believe to be right by the Jamaican people. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.